the mimer is Torah. That's Torah. Torah is the mimer.
So, and then you're doing a different mimer? Yeah.
No. I didn't finish the one that was in Torah Or, like I said I would. And now, oh God willing, I'm going to do it. Here we go.
But you usually give two shiurim.
Yes, there will be Torah Or, and then after that, there'll be Devar Malchut. That's the other shiur.
So the Torah Or you're doing now is shorter because you're continuing it.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay, ready? Go. Ready? Here we go. Yesterday, we learned, 2 days ago, we began a ma'amar. A ma'amar is a Hasidic discourse, a speech that was given by the Rebbe's, and afterwards it's written down. Sometimes they even write it down themselves beforehand. What it's written. In any case, it's in, by us, it's now in essay form, and it's in a book called Torah Or. Torah Or, one of the main books of Chabad Hasidut, written by the first Rebbe of Chabad, who also wrote the book, the Tanya. All right. Now we're talking about a very timely, important, and unique and unusual topic. We began it 2 days ago, so I'll sort of try to refresh everybody's memory, and my memory also. It's talking about the idea of what God knows and how God knows, and how it is that God knows everything that's going to happen in the world, everything. And as a off the side, really wasn't discussed at all. But if God knows everything that's going to happen and that is happening, and by God, there's no real such thing as time. Time is just a creation by God. God's not creating time little by little. Time is a creation, is one unit. So by God, past, present, and future is one. We can't understand what this is, but nevertheless, we can't understand what creation is either. What does it mean God creates? How does that mean? So, a second, there we go. Thank you. Okay. Good. So God is creating everything. Good. He's creating everything constantly. We can't understand what that means, but also God knows what happened and what is happening and what is going to happen automatically. And that the rabbis say, they use the term galui v'yadua. It is revealed and known before God. Okay, what does this mean? So if we say that God is just like the Wizard of Oz or something, or he's sitting behind this big veil, and he's pulling all these levers, or God is some sort of a big angel or a big spirit, and he's just got a billion eyes, and he just sees everything. So sort of, that's sort of a little bit understandable. And that doesn't really explain how God knows what's going to be. If God knows what's going to be, then that means it already is. So it's not going to be, right? It already exists. So it's not, the future is hidden from us, but from God it's not hidden. So what does it mean? Not only that, we got to have a bigger question is that the message of Judaism is that God is one. When we say God is one, we don't mean that there's only one God. We say that God is one means he's the only real existence. There is no existence except for him. Everything we see in the world is just being created by him. And it's being created miraculously from nothing. There's no existence outside of him, outside of God. So God's existence is an infinitely real existence. We can't possibly imagine how real that it is, and our existence is just a created existence. But so if so, there's an infinite difference, a big gap between the two. God is one, nothing exists except for him. So how can it be that God cares about all these little details that's going on in the world? And not only does he care, the Torah comes to tell us that it's very, very important to God. That's why God creates it. Right? He's got, you can say he doesn't have anything better to do, because that's the only thing that he did, is create the world, creating the universe. Except for that, everything is true reality, and the world is not real reality. That's the whole. But because God's creating it, so that makes it reality. So what's going on? So we have the question about how does God know everything? Let's not look at that from God's point of view. Let's look at it from our point of view. What does that mean? What does it mean? Right? If God is really creating us, and that God is the ultimate reality, and God is not just a biblical figure, but all being, all existence comes from him, and he cares about every existence, and he knows what's happening, and knows what already is going to happen, and it's important what happened. So what does that mean to us? What type of a God are we praying to? Right? If we're praying to a God that's very austere and he's very far away, so that's a worthwhile to, but if we pray to a God that he cares about every little bug and every little this, I mean, that's like an obsession. A person that, he's got a job to do, let's say he works in a bank and always thinking about is just, cleaning off his chair or arranging that's a person that's a compulsive person, right? That's what God is caring about, every little bug and every little, whatever it is, every little molecule and how they're buzzing around and the planets and everything like that. And if there's extraterrestrial people in Mars, he cares about them also. He's creating everything. So what type of a God is that? I mean, what? That's what God wants. He just cares about these meaningless things. So what's going on? And also, how does he do it? That's the big question over here is how does he do it? How does he do it? So the Rebbe says, okay, so our big problem is if God is totally one and unlike anything else. So how does he get involved in every little detail in the world and care about every detail in the world? How does this work? So if we remember last time we said, okay, God is a little bit more complicated than we think. If you think that the world is complicated, and it is, and science reveals new and more amazing details about the microcosm and the macrocosm and the stars and new galaxies and new whatever it is, nebulae, and in physics they reveal new powers and new interactions and new things all the time, and it gets more and more and more and more complicated constantly. Well, infinitely more so is the working of God, and a lot of the Kabbalistic books, that's what they deal with, all these different aspects of God, and especially how God interacts with us. How God actually answers our prayers. Now, I know there's a lot of branches of Judaism that do not agree with this, but this is what Hasidut Chabad says, and that's what we're teaching over here. Hasidut Chabad says that's the uniqueness of Judaism. What's truly unique with Judaism that not just separates us from all the other religions, that makes all the other religions false. They miss the point. The point is to be connected to the Creator, because the Creator knows and cares about every detail of life. Okay, now how does he know and how does he do it? So says the Rebbe. Oh, here we go. Let's go. Okay, there we go. So if God knows something, so that means he has to pay attention to it. If so, that sort of disturbs his oneness a little bit, like us, when something is not known to us and then it becomes known to us. So that means before we were lacking something and now we're adding something that's can't be by God. So how can it be? But the idea is like this. 1 second. Somebody said something. What did they say? Don't worry. This is a very good message. Don't worry. Okay. I don't know if you can see the messages, but here we go. If we only got that out of the class, that would be enough. Okay, and if you notice, there's 10 sphirot, and there's vessels and lights and vessels. God has 10 aspects of his personality, right? It says God created us in his image. So God does have an image, huh? It says, no, that's not, God does not have an image. That's so. But God does have an image because he created us in his image. So how does it work out? So there's what's called 10 sphirot. God has 10 facets, if you want to call it, of his personality, of his creative force, his creative ability. And everything that God creates has the stamp of 10 sphirot, 10 aspects to it. Essentially, there's 3 aspects of intellect and the emotions. Giving, chesed, kindness, limitation, gevura, balance, tiferet, etc. All the 10 sphirot. Okay, so these 10 sphirot of God, these 10 aspects of God, there's what's called lights and vessels. We did this before, so I'm going a little bit quickly. Bechinas chesed and gevura, the aspects of God which are called kindness and severity. Zeo, this is bechinat kli. This is only the vessel. This is the vessels of God. And this is how God comes out, how he expresses himself to the world. That's why the world was made in 7 days. Corresponding, God could have created it in one instant. Why did he create 7 days? Because to express these different aspects, these different emotions of God. And that's that what we see, that God seems to be differentiating, that there's 7 days of the week. And each one of those different, God created different things. Those are what we call the vessels of God. Of the or, but the light, hu ha'ora me'en sof. This is a ray from God. The lav mikol ilon midos iuklol, that God is not of any of these aspects at all. For instance, let's say I do a kind thing. I do a kind act, right? I give $1 million to poor people. I give them $1 million. So they say, oh, he's very kind. There's my pictures in all the papers and everything like that. So I come to the newspaper and I say, what did you do? Why'd you do that? So what did I do? I said, you put my picture on the paper. You said, that's my picture? She said, yeah, that's not my picture. That's my body. That's my face. I want you to put a picture of me. So what does that mean? What does it mean? That I gave the money, that's only my hand and the money. But there's me, my kindness, right? There's me. I was the one. That's what I want the picture of. So, of course, that's ridiculous. Doesn't make any sense. But on the other hand, it's true, right? The fact of the matter is it was not my hand that gave the money. It was not my hand. And what I gave wasn't so much the money. It's the person behind the hand. It's the value behind the money, right? If somebody discovers that money was, forged money, so I didn't give anything. So the value of the money, that's, you have to put the picture and value, and you have to put my kindness, not my hand or the bills, because that doesn't make any sense, right? But on the other hand, it's true. It certainly is true. So the same thing is with God. God creates the whole world, but the fact that God is creating the world, God's creative force of creating the world, that's only the external. Inside of that whole business is God is doing it. That's what's called light. Light is the soul inside, the godliness, the genuineness. And the vessels, that's the action, how it comes out. The light, mitlabesh, has to be put into the vessel. Shehu chesed and gevura, v'shara midos, and the other aspects of God. There's tiferet and netzach and hod. She'em nikrin, that they are called kelim, vessels. She'em magbilim, at the or, they limit the light of God. Ubehem val yadam, and with them and through them, nimshach or is drawn down the light. Is draw down godliness, liyot to be mechaya and Ibrahim, to enliven the world. Bal gavul, a limited world. Liyoti tavut, that there should be the creation of all these different levels. Michael, the angel Michael, which that's the aspect of God's kindness as it is revealed in the world of Bria or Yetzirah or whatever. And Gabriel, the Machna Gabriel, and also the camp of Michael, the camp of Michael, the camp of the angel Michael. Those are like infinite number of angels on the side of kindness. Mekablim, they receive from God's kindness. Gabriel and the unlimited number of angels under him, they receive from God's severity. But this cannot come down from God's light, but by means of the vessels. Okay, so again, God created the world, right? He wants to create the world. That's how we got into all these problems. If God wouldn't have created the world, then there wouldn't have any problems, right? There would just be total oneness of God. But God didn't want that. He wanted to create a world. And why did he create the world? He wanted to. That's the whole story of the Torah. God wanted, what was there before the world? There was no before. When God created the world, that started before. That started before and after. But before God created the world, there was no such thing as before. It didn't exist. There was no before. There was just true reality. And God creating the world, that's through God's vessels, so to speak. And that's what we call is sphirot, is aspects. Just like it's impossible, hashpat kesef, you can't give money from the soul. You have to put it in a person's body. The hand that gives charity to the poor person. Al yadei hayad, by means of the physical hand. Hine, kamokin, similarly, by means of these vessels of the 10 sfirot, ugamkin bechinas halat, is an elevation. Elevation, zechut. So God's coming down, and also by means of these vessels, God is also coming up. What if the people have merit or not? Now, God creates the world and everything in it because everything in the world has what we call the responsibility. Everything in the world has responsibility. Before the flood, everyone in the world realized they had responsibility, and they also realized that it's fun not to do your responsibility, but to do what you want. So everyone in the world wanted to have fun, and they didn't want to do what God wanted. They didn't want to limit themselves in any way. No one says, hey, you can't do that. It says you can't do that. There's no such thing as you can't do that. Who are you to tell me you can't do that? The only thing you can't do is to tell somebody that they can't do things. Right? So there was no limit. There was no, what about your responsibility to God? So therefore, God brought a flood to the world. Again, this whole business, let's just not lose our perspective. The whole thing of the creation of the world is because the world is tremendously, infinitely important to God. The world is not just like God, had he was chewing tobacco and he spit on the side and there came the world, right? And the world is just like this testing ground. And if you're lucky, you'll go back to the spitter, you'll go back to God. That's all the other religions basically in the world. Life is pain, life is problems, which is the truth. Life is definitely pain, definitely problems. What are we supposed to do? Get out. Stop the world. I want to get off, right? Get out of here. I want to get out. That's not what Judaism says, and that's not the truth also. That's a big lie. That's why all the other religions in the world are lies. Because the main thing is this physical world. God created the physical world. So that's what it says in the Torah. God created the world. This is not just like, a fairy story or whatever, a story about somebody trapped in a prison and how we got in there and how we get out. It's talking about what God's essence. God cares about the world. He created the world because he wants to. It's very important to him. And then we're just talking about different aspects of this value of God creating the world. Okay, so there's two aspects of these vessels. One aspect of the vessels is how God, through them, he comes down, so to speak, and he creates the world where it seems that he's not here. And the other aspect of God is, does the world do what God wants? Are they filling God's, the responsibility to the creator, that's the whole motivation for being in existence, that we have responsibility. Everything has responsibility. So if they don't do the responsibility, so that, so to speak, God sees and feels. How does he do it? Also through these vessels. These vessels also like nerves, right? Like nerves. You have nervous system. I have a nervous system. All God's children got nervous systems. We all have nervous system. What does the nervous system do? On one hand, it sends down that our hands and our feet do things. And on the other hand, there's the action, and then there's also reaction, right? It comes back up. And why do we do this? Because we're created in God's image, and God is the same exact thing. So God creates the world, but on the other hand, he reacts to the world. Because by means of that, a person does a sin, he makes like a bad angel. And it makes a blemish. The ketem and a stain, and that angel or that nerve, if you want to call it, which is appointed alness. There are angels and makablim that receive from the aspect of the kindness, and there's some that receive from this, etc. Like the angel and Gabriel we talked about. So every human being has a whole gamut, a whole company of angels and powers that are, those are these vessels that are on one hand sending him life, and on the other hand, that's coming down and also coming back up. That's the idea of the angel, and he passes, one angel passes things to angels that are above it. Until it gets to the vessels of the 10 sfirot of Malchut of Atzilut. Atzilut, that's the highest dimension of godliness. So it's the same thing with the nervous system, right? The nerves in your finger pass to the nerves in your spine. And the nerves in the spine pass to the nerves in the base of your brain. And the brain, base of that, and then it processes it in your brain. So it goes from one level to a higher level. That's the whole entire world. So through these vessels, God sends down life, and through the vessels, God reacts to the life. He acts and reacts. In this vessel is the light of God. These vessels are inside of them is pure godliness. God is running the whole business, right? It's all, but it breaks down in all these details. Nimsa, so it comes down, al yedei by means of the vessels, mitaleh or goes up to the light of Ein Sof, Baruch Hu, Hamaluvish, which is in these vessels of Ein Sof, of Esespheros. I'll give an example. I don't know if this is a good example, but it used to be a thing called a movie theater. You go there. I remember when I was young, they don't have that anymore. I always remember you want to get my bar mitzvah pictures, right? So you used to come there with a camera. And I remember even the camera used to have to wind it up, your camera. And then after that, you would get the process. Then you come home and there would be this movie camera. The movie camera would be a white light. And the white light would shine through the film. And it would shine on the screen. Oh, there's grandpa and there's grandma. Okay, once in a while the thing would break or something. One of the film would break. All you'd see is this white light. So you figure, well, that's even better. I mean, the film that covers over the light. But I mean, how long can you watch a white light? Tremendously, I'm not interested. But basically, the white light, that's the main thing. Without the light, the whole thing is gone. So it's something like this that I'm talking about. The vessels, that's like the film. And because of the different colors, so that hides the light. So therefore, it seems that there's these pictures on the screen. But the fact of the matter is the real thing, it's all really light. It's just different aspects of light. But without the vessels, there's nothing there. I don't know if it's a good example, but maybe. So that's my example. This whole world is like light of God, but it's coming through these sphirot of God, which that's like the film, the different colors. Okay, therefore it says, sometimes it says the eyes of God, mishotatot. The eyes of God, they wander, they survey, feminine. This is the vessels of the 10 sphirot. These are the vessels of the 10 sphirot, how they send messages back up to God. That's sending messages back up to God. Mishotatot means feminine. The feminine aspect is from below to above. That's why God is always referred to as masculine, because that's the masculine aspect coming from above to below. From above to below, giving. Looking at the partis, etc., etc., etc. The yesh lahavin, we have to understand, since that the eyes of God. What's it? Is this the thing? Yeah. Okay. I don't know where the end of these parentheses are. Since it says that the eyes of God, so we saw that it says in the prophets sometimes it says the eyes of God are surveying the world. It says in feminine, mishotatot, and sometimes it says the eyes of God are mishotatim, masculine. So the masculine aspect, that's how God, that's the aspect of the vessels, how it comes down into the world. And the aspect of the feminine, that's how what happens in the world goes back up, so to speak, to God. So to speak, the masculine, that's God's action. And the feminine, that's God's reaction, how things go back up to God. Yishlav, we have to understand, since the eyes of God, these are the vessels of the 10 sphirot, of the 4 worlds, 4 dimensions. They're called 4 worlds, Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. And the angels, if so, how can it be that God needs to know everything by means of these vessels? Hari Ayotzer Ayin, who is making all these vessels? God is making them. The one who creates the eye, Halo Yabit. This is in Psalms. Can't God see himself? The Atzmo. What does God need all this whole business for, of a whole big nervous system with the vessels coming down and vessels that they send messages down and then coming back up? God can do the whole thing himself, can't he? We can understand about Hamshachas Achayas. We can understand that God giving life to the creations. So maybe that has to be by, let's say, a sort of a circulatory system of God to come down. Because if not, lo yuchlu nivro the kabel, you can't the world can't receive too much godliness, which is not the case though of God knowing. God knows everything. Ein shaykh lomo, we can't say chas v'shalom that God doesn't know something. If so, in Cain, why does God have to have these eyes and these vessels that are going around? The Habavade, certainly everything is revealed in front of God. He knows everything. It says, but like it says, Kael Deos Avaya. God is a God of knowledge, awareness. So again, let me just repeat what's going on here. This is a very important thing because what is idolatry? Idolatry means you don't pray to God. You don't pray to God at all, right? You don't pray. You pray to something in between God and you. That's idolatry. And there's some by a Jew, anything is right. If you pray to the sun that God created the sun and the moon. I'll pray to the sun and the moon that God created. I'm praying to God, the Creator, but I'm doing it through the sun. Whenever the sun comes up, I bow down to the sun. You can't do that. A Jew can't do that. A non-Jew, it says, is not punishable for doing that. A non-Jew is not punishable, but he's not supposed to. Everything that's forbidden for a Jew to do, as far as idolatry, is forbidden for a non-Jew. But a non-Jew get a little bit more lenient. For a Jew to worship idols in any form, that's a red light. For a non-Jew, it's a yellow light. Not supposed to do it. What's the problem? That's why Abraham broke all the vessels. What's the problem? Because God knows everything. And God is infinitely close. Personally, he's close. And he listens to your prayers. And God cares about you and he provides for you. Says the Rebbe, 1 second. And God knows everything that's happening. So the Rebbe says, 1 second. So if so, God is infinitely close and he knows everything. So what do you have to have all these angels and all this business we just finished talking about with the vessels and the lights in order to have this whole spy system or whatever it's called, the surveillance cameras. What does God need all these vessels and lights and Kabbalah stuff? The God is one and he's everywhere and everything. He knows everything, right? God knows everything. Just like a person knows what's going on in his body. I have a stone in my shoe. I know it. Nobody else knows it, but I know it because I feel it's my body. The same thing. The whole world is God's body, so to speak. So God automatically knows everything. Says, oh, that's a good question. So he says, because it says by God that is God, Kael Deos Hashem. God is a God of, realities. Dea means that something is real. There's two types of realities by God. Dat Elyon v'dat Tachton. What's called the upper reality and the lower reality. The word dat really means connection, awareness, consciousness. Dat. It's one of the three aspects of intellect. Chochmah, Bina, and dat. Dat means connection. Something becomes real. Dat means that something is real to you, right? You get a check for $1 million, but it hasn't got your name on it, so it doesn't do anything to you. It's not a real present. If someone says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I gave the wrong check. Here, this is the one with your name." Oh, now that is that click. It's mine. It's real. So it says the same thing by God. By God, the whole thing with God is reality, right? What is reality? That's God. What is reality? That's like I say, I made this up. I don't know. So there's no such thing as an atheist. There's only an I-theist. Everybody believes there's some sort of an ultimate reality, right? Those people who say that there's no God, so they say it's themselves. So he believes in himself, but everybody has ultimate reality. It says by God also, there's two types of reality. There's what's called the upper reality, upper dot, and the lower reality. Dat Elyon, the upper reality by God. Hu bechinas makif. This surrounds v'soviv kolmin, and it is above and encompasses all being. It encompasses all definition. Olam means to be defined. One aspect of God defies all definition. Hainu ki yesh bechinas dat. There's an aspect of reality. Shiyodea, the ro'eh, call, that you know and see everything. Rak shahadat hu b'bechinas makif. It surrounds. Hainu she'enu mispashet v'amidos. It doesn't spread out in the emotions. Leo, to be hitpa'alut mi'adavar, to be affected by something. Shu yodea, that he knows. Or he sees. Okay, like it says, Shene'amar lo hibit avon b'Yakov. Like it says, God says he does not see any sin in Jacob, in the Jewish people. What does it mean he doesn't sin? He doesn't see any sins. The Jewish people did a lot of sins. It says, that God does not see bad things the Jewish people do. Ella, vayar ovon v'lo yitbonen. God saw sin, but he didn't think about it. If you did good, what did you do to God? Not like a little kid comes running inside and he says, Johnny took my stick. He took my stick away from me. His father says, oh, come on, it's not such a big thing. Yeah, but he took my stick and he lit it on fire and he's burning up your car. Oh, that's it. But if it's a little thing like a stick, who cares? Or someone comes and says, look, quick, did you see what that ant did to that other ant? Look, that red ant, he's biting the black ant. You got to do something. Well, listen, I don't care. What do I care? But you know what's happening. And you just let it happen, right? Yeah, because it doesn't make any difference. It's not important. So sometimes you can see and know things, but that you just don't react to them. Maybe you can give an example of this. I don't know, but sometimes there's I remember in this yeshiva that I worked in, somebody came in and they did some damage in the middle of the night. So who was it? He covered up all of this. You can't possibly know what it is. Just don't worry about it. We have a surveillance camera. Oh, really? I didn't know. Yeah, we have a surveillance camera. They opened up the surveillance camera, and there it was. They showed who the person was. They confronted him with it, etc. Okay, but it was on the surveillance camera before. But it's just that who cares? Nobody knew. It's the same thing. It was recorded. It was there. But it just didn't make an impression on anybody. I don't know if these examples I'm giving is good, but that's the example. There's two aspects of God. One aspect of God is that he knows everything, but it's not important to him, so to speak. Al Zeh Ne'amar, it says, Torah Naimeros, that God does not see bad. She'en riyaso hara ose roshem. It doesn't affect God at all. Call. Why? Ki shmamis b'yadayim tetafes, because it says that a little spider or something in the palace of the king can do what it wants to, and the king doesn't care. A shmamis is like a little spider, or a lion, or a lizard or something. And if it's in the king's palace, who cares what it does, right? One of the king's advisors comes and says, Your Majesty, the spider just ate 3 flies. What are you talking about? Who cares about this? He's got taken care of his whole kingdom and everything. The same thing is with the world. God sees everything, knows everything, but he doesn't care. From there, this is also the source of forgiveness and mercy. Because no blemish reaches there. This is above any of the vessels of the 10 sefirot that they come down and they go up, and like we said before. Rakapagam, the blemish and the reward, onesh and the punishment, who nimshach is by means of dat mitpashet v'nimshach b'midot. This is by means of the what's called the lower reality of God, which that's called dat tachton. V'hu mitlabesh, what's called memalik homi. Okay, so in other words, what does it mean? We say, for instance, God was, we say in our prayers, Adon Olam Asher Malach, B'terem Kol Yitzur Nivra. The God was a king before he created anything. How could he be a king if there was nothing to rule over? So he had the potential of being a king. So when he created the world, he changed, right? No, didn't change. God does not change. He created the world from nothing. It's nothing. We can't understand what this means. There's no way we can understand what it means that there's such a thing as nothing and that God created it from nothing and God created it. These are incomprehensible. Basically, we're dealing with things that are incomprehensible. And one of the reasons why it's incomprehensible is because we are so incredibly unreal and insignificant We're just little creations from absolutely nothing. It just so happens that God wants us. But our minds are so incredibly small, it's like trying to explain physics to a rock. In a way, a rock has more chance of understanding physics than we have of understanding God, because a rock and physics are part of the same world. And we and God are not part of the same, so to speak, world. We're creations. He's the creator. We can't even figure out what that means. I mean, there's a lot of very genius philosophers and scientists and deep thinkers that they say there's no such thing as God. What are you talking about? And they certainly have what to rely on. I mean, they can't prove it, but they certainly, you can't see God, you can't feel God, you can't understand God. Right? Look at all the terrible things that happen because people believed in God. So that's the aspect of God which is called Sovev Kalmi, that he defies any definition, defies any existence. He was before the world, after the world, while the world is like nothing by him. But on the other hand, God did create the world, so everything that happens is totally meaningless. God sees it, it's like nothing has happened. Nothing has happened. And that's what's called Mamali Kalmi. I know this is the vessels of the 10 Sphirot of Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, Vasiya. That's what's called the lower awareness of God. And therefore, Yediazu, this is by means of Eine Hashem, this lower awareness of God, that's the thing of these vessels, these masculine eyes and physical eyes of the vessels of God. There's the vessels of God and all these different emotions that by means of this, it's drawn, it causes hitpalut, that God reacts of reward and punishment. Shapagam megia me'akelim, this comes from these vessels, which is not the case by means of knowing when God knows the upper knowledge of God. This is, which is not by means of these vessels of the 10 Sphirot, even though that everything is revealed in front of God, but there's not coming from this, that doesn't come any reaction because the world is too nothing, it's too insignificant. Okay, does this really explain anything? Maybe. You know, it's sort of, if you want to call it, makes the problem a little bit, puts it in a sort of a different compartment. We're saying that God knows and that God reacts and that God cares. That is from what's called the lower reality of God. But the upper reality of God, there's no pain and there's no bad and there's no good and there's no, right? Just God just sees everything that happens. God is everything that happens. Doesn't bother God at all. It's not, obviously it's not so simple, because we just finished saying that from this upper awareness of God, which is not affected by bad, that's where mercy comes from. So it must be that it is affected. Because if it's not affected, then why does God have to be merciful or anything? Okay, the Teda, you should know, Shekenu, that so it is, from the Indian of Yediyah, from this idea of knowledge and choice. Here we got the big question. Ready? Here we go. She'ena Yediyah, the knowledge that God is aware of everything, that God knows, Shezeh Yihiyeh, will be tzaddik or Russia, this person will be good or bad. There's going to come an Abraham, there's going to come a Yishmael. The love, and God knows what's going to be. So if so, why did Abraham get a reward? God already knew what was going to happen. Or was God surprised? What type of a test was it? Right? God said, oh, you passed the test. God knew it was going to pass the test, right? He says, no, this knowledge that God knew that a person was going to do good or go bad, it does not machreches as a bechira. It doesn't have any effect on your free choice at all. How can it be? Right? If God already knows that, Yerovam ben Navat is going to stand a statue of himself in the holy temple, so he already knows it. It's already set. Why should he get punished? Right? It's like going to a movie and watching the bad guy, kill the good person, and you start screaming at the bad guy, "You better I kill you!" Right? Every time you go, you say the same thing. You know he's going to do it. You know what's going to happen. It's already preset. If everything is already preset, so then we don't have free choice, right? This is wrong. We do have free choice. How could it possibly be? Ella Lafi, because Hashem is break, that God knows everything from beforehand, Asher Nasa, even before it was done, because God is creating time future by God is just a creation. God is not creating it in the past. To us, it unfolds to be the future. This is what's called the upper knowledge of God. Not by means of any vessels of these 10 spherot. Like it says, God's eyes, the eyes of God, mishotatim. It says that they survey the world, the masculine aspect, to see everything that's done. Shekavarna said that's already done. Shazen nira lebechinas. It seems to be like angels and vessels of Bria Yetzir and Asiya. That's made by, I mean, that's what happened, the changes that are made by our bad deeds. It makes a blemish or a stain. And the angel, we said before, which we said the angels, that's these vessels, which is not the case. The knowledge that God knows everything and he knows what's going to be. Umaisa Adam, and everything that a person does, kodem, before it's done, Ein ol yadam klal. This is not done by the angels or by these vessels at all. This has nothing to do with that. This is Yediazu, b'makom gavua ma'od. It's a very high place. Bechin is dat elyon, the upper awareness of God. Leo dat zu, zeh bechin is makif, to be a surrounding level. Einu machriach at the bechira, does not choose, does not force a person's choice at all. She'ena adam mitpayal mizeh. A person is not affected by this at all. Okay, maybe I can give you an example about this. I mean, I thought about this a lot myself. I'll give you an example. Let's say, for instance, you discover that there's a person in the world that knows everything you're going to do. Everything. I remember when I was a little kid, just coming back to me now. I thought to myself, listen, maybe everything that I'm doing is already predetermined. Everything is predetermined. I mean, after all, when you're doing things, you have some sort of a motivation to do. So maybe everything that I do is already preset. Like in a movie. You get a movie, you go to a movie, you can do it now. You buy a movie, right? And you can watch the same movie twice, 3 times. There's people who watched, certain movies 10 times, 20 times. They like the movie. So they know exactly what's going to happen. So they know what's going to happen. Maybe all of life is preset. And I thought to myself, I was a little kid. I don't know what I was. 7 years old, 8 years old. I thought maybe everything I do, no matter what I do, is already preset. Well, how can I get out of this thing? So I said, I know what I'll do. I'll do something unexpected. Like that, I'll go like this. I'll go like that. So no, that was also preset. Everything was preset. So I thought, man, what am I going to do now? Everything is preset. So I thought to myself, 1 second, that I'm paralyzing myself with these thoughts, that's also preset. So what should I do? Forget about it. Live my life, right? No matter what I do, it's going to be preset anyway. Whatever I'm going to say, I'll sit in my room just so that the guy that was already preset, whatever it was. So I figure, what I'll do? I'll just live my life. I'll live my life in a normal way. I'll make my own choices and everything. How does it affect me in any way that someone knows what I'm going to do? I don't know if that's a very good answer to the problem, to the question. Maybe it's a good answer to the problem, that you don't get frozen by the fact that God knows everything. But here the Rebbe is trying to say something a little bit different than that. In my example, the person who knows everything and me, this person just has let's say, a tremendous, prophetic sense, or the crystal ball or something like that. You can look into the future, you can tell what's going to happen. Here we're talking about God's reality is infinitely more than ours. Infinitely more than ours, to a degree that we cannot possibly perceive. And even more, if, like in the story I just told you, it shouldn't affect you. So how much more so the fact that God knows what we're going to do, it does not affect. Doesn't affect whatsoever. So it does not change. She'ena Adam, a person is not affected by this because afilu b'midos, even in the upper lios luizes schar v'onish, etc., etc. We can't say, well, if God knows it, how can I be punished? You know what I was going to do. She has schar v'onish zeu davka al yedei das tachtim. This is by means of what's called the lower reality. She'al yedei akelim, which is by means of the vessels. Look in this Kabbalistic book, which is called Pardes, etc. Pardes. That's a Kabbalistic book by Moshe Cordovero, which was right before the Arizal. Okay. According to this, now we can understand that this knowledge that God has before a person does a sin, this is what's called the upper knowledge of God. And it doesn't affect the lower knowledge. And that's what it says in Parshat Shemot, that God saw the Jewish people and God knew. The Jewish people screamed out to God, and God knew that they were suffering and he saved them. But God knew it beforehand, didn't he? God knew it a long time. There's no surprise. This is not talking about that all of a sudden God knew something he didn't know before. But before, this was in God's upper awareness. And God was not affected by this, any punishment to Paro or reward to the Jewish people. But by means that God decided, which is a whole different thing, the whole different, God decided by means of this eyes of God, they're talking about the vessels, that to see this thing that's already, there's the eyes of God, to see what's already done, actually, by means of this, God knew, it says he knew. He drove down from the upper awareness to the lower awareness of God. And now by this, God reacts with reward and punishment. This, that God sees everything and knows everything, this is called the upper awareness of God. And by this, it says, that comes from the upper awareness of God, comes down into the world. That's what it says, the eye of God to those who fear him. Okay, so sometimes it says the eyes of God, and sometimes it says the eye of God. The eyes of God, feminine, sometimes mishotatot, mishotatim, that's the lower aspect, lower awareness, the lower reality of God. That's what we call these vessels. But sometimes it says the eye of God, singular. The eye of God are on those who fear him. It says that on Mount, when Mashiach comes, it says we will see God eye to eye, like it says in the Zohar book. It says Yosef, a tzaddik, he merited it. That's why it says Alei Ayin. He was of the higher eye of God. Okay, so this upper eye of God, this surrounding aspect that God doesn't care, God does care. But it's a whole total different way of caring. And this is especially for the Jewish people. That's what it says, the eye of God. And that's what it says that Yosef, he reached this level. Now we can understand that the sin of Sodom, that's in this week's Torah portion. That's what it means, the sin of Sodom and Amorah. It says that God said, I'm going to come down and punish them. What does it mean God said, I'm going to come down? He already knew they were going to sin before the world was created. The Torah exists before the world was created. In the Torah, it's written these things. It's written that would happen before it happened. It says, no, when it says that God came down, it means that he came down from his upper awareness into the lower awareness. When God comes down from the upper level to the lower level, it can also fix up all of the bad things that are in the world, things that are bad that have already been done. But God can draw from his upper level in order to sweeten those things up. Say, listen, what you did is bad only in the lower reality, but in the upper reality, it's not so bad. I can fix things up. In the case of the generation of the dispersion and of the flood, is God couldn't find any merit to them, and so he had to either destroy them or spread them out. As we're talking a little bit more, God willing, tomorrow. But the main point of this whole business that we're talking about now is what's called hashgacha pratit. In fact, God is infinitely close to us. In fact, God cares about every detail that happens. And that's why we should pray to and believe in only the Creator alone. Because on one hand, he is infinitely, infinitely distant from us. He creates all the spiritual worlds that all the religions believe in. He creates them. But on the other hand, he's infinitely close to us. He creates me and you. And he cares about what we do. As we'll talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. And now let's do the Yom Yom. The Devar Malchut, I'm sorry. Just one moment. What am I doing here?